My life changed the day I stepped into that office. Not because of the job, but because of him. Hi, my name is Amanda, and I'm 23. Fresh out of college, I thought working as a personal assistant for my stepfather, Mark, would be simple. It wasn't. Mark isn't just any businessman. He's a shark, charming, calculated, and always in control. I admired him growing up, but I never really knew him. This job, it felt like my chance to bridge that gap. Day one started like any other office job. Or so I thought. Mark greeted me with his signature smile, the one that made everyone instantly trust him. Welcome to the team, Amanda. I've been waiting for this. His words felt warm, but the way his eyes lingered on me, just a beat too long, left me unsettled. I brushed it off. Maybe I was overthinking. After all, he's family. But things weren't as simple as they seemed. The first hints. Mark's attention quickly became different. At first, it was subtle, a hand resting on my shoulder a second too long, compliments that felt just a little too personal. You've really grown up, Amanda, he said one afternoon, his voice low, almost intimate. You're not the same girl I remember. It wasn't just his words, it was the way he said them, like he was testing the waters. A chill ran down my spine. I laughed it off awkwardly, trying to focus on my work. But I couldn't ignore the weight of his gaze. The late-night coffee. The turning point came after hours. The office was quiet, the rest of the staff long gone. I was finishing up some paperwork when Mark walked in, holding 2 cups of coffee. You're working too hard, he said, sitting across from me. Here, take a break. I hesitated but took the cup. The room felt smaller with just the 2 of us. His tone was casual, but there was something beneath it, a tension I couldn't place. Do you ever feel like you're meant for more, Amanda? Like this job is just the beginning. His eyes locked onto mine, searching for something. Approval? A reaction? I couldn't tell. I nodded, keeping my answer vague. I guess so. Mark leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper. You have potential. More than you realize. You just need someone to show you the way. For a moment, the air between us felt electric. I didn't know if I was imagining it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of something dangerous. The unspoken boundary. The days that followed blurred into a strange mix of professionalism and something else. Mark started finding reasons to keep me close. Extra meetings, private lunches, mentorship sessions. He was careful, never crossing a line outright, but the undertone was always there. One evening, as I was gathering my things to leave, he stopped me. Amanda, can I ask you something? I froze, clutching my bag. Sure. He smiled, but there was a sharpness in his expression. Do you ever feel like people underestimate you? Like they don't see what you're truly capable of? The question caught me off guard. Sometimes, I guess. That's the problem with this world, he said, stepping closer. People don't recognize greatness until it's too late. I didn't know what to say. The way he looked at me, like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve, left me both flattered and unnerved. The line blurs. The more time I spent in that office, the harder it became to separate my role as his assistant from whatever this was. Mark had a way of pulling me in, making me feel like I was the only person who truly mattered in his orbit. But with every lingering glance, every veiled compliment, the boundary between us felt thinner. And I wasn't sure how much longer it could hold. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was something else. Something I wasn't prepared for. What happened next turned my world upside down. You think you've seen it all? Trust me, you haven't. Stick around because this story, it's just getting started. I should have walked away. I knew it. Every instinct screamed at me to quit and find something, anything, else. But something about Mark's attention kept me tethered. Was it curiosity? A desire to prove myself? Or something darker I wasn't ready to admit? Whatever it was, it kept me coming back. The small moments continued, each one more deliberate than the last. A lingering hand on my back as he passed by, compliments that felt too personal, questions that dug a little too deep into my private life. Every interaction felt like a thread in a web I couldn't escape. It started with an email. Amanda, stay after hours tonight. There's something important I need to discuss with you. Confidential. Mark. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. What could be so urgent that it had to wait until everyone else left? I could have said no. I should have said no. Instead, I replied with a simple, "Of course. See you then." The office emptied out as the clock ticked past 6. By 7, it was just the two of us. I sat at my desk, pretending to finish some reports, when Mark appeared in the doorway. "You're still here. Good." His smile was warm, but his eyes carried that familiar intensity. "Come to my office." I followed him, my pulse racing. His office felt different at night, quieter, more intimate. He motioned for me to sit in the chair opposite his desk, then closed the door behind me. The click of the lock was subtle, but it sent a shiver down my spine. "Can I get you something? Coffee? Tea?" he asked, his tone unusually casual. "No, thank you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He sat down, leaning forward on the desk. "Amanda, you've been doing an exceptional job here. Truly. But I feel like you're holding back." "Holding back," I repeated, confused. He nodded, his gaze never leaving mine. "You're capable of so much more. I see it. I feel it. But I wonder, do you?" The air between us felt heavy, charged. I shifted in my seat, unsure of how to respond. I'm not sure what you mean." Mark smiled, but there was something predatory about it. "I think you do." The conversation shifted after that, becoming more personal, more intimate. He asked about my goals, my dreams, my fears. At first, I tried to keep my answers professional, but Mark had a way of breaking down walls. Before I knew it, I was telling him things I hadn't shared with anyone else. "You're special, Amanda," he said, his voice low. "You don't even realize it, do you?" I didn't know what to say. His words were flattering, but the way he said them felt dangerous. And then it happened. Mark stood up and walked around the desk, stopping directly in front of me. He leaned down, his face inches from mine. "I see so much potential in you. So much more than anyone else does." I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. His proximity was overwhelming, and I didn't know whether to lean back or stay perfectly still. "You deserve more than just a job, Amanda," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "You deserve someone who can help you reach your full potential." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I wanted to say something, anything, to break the tension, but my throat felt dry. And then, just as suddenly as he'd closed the distance between us, he stepped back. "That's all for tonight," he said, his tone suddenly brisk and professional. "Think about what I said." I left his office in a daze, my thoughts racing. What had just happened? Was it all in my head? Or was there something more to his words? Something unspoken but unmistakable? The next few days were a blur. Mark acted as if nothing had happened, but his gaze lingered a little too long, his touch felt a little too deliberate. And I couldn't deny the way my heart skipped a beat every time he entered the room. It was intoxicating and terrifying. One evening, as I was finishing up some reports, Mark appeared at my desk. "Dinner tonight," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I'd like to discuss your future with the company." I hesitated, but the look in his eyes told me I didn't have a choice. We went to a quiet, upscale restaurant, the kind of place where the lighting was dim and the air felt heavy with secrets. Over the course of the meal, Mark's charm was on full display. He complimented my work ethic, my intelligence, my ambition. But beneath the flattery, there was something else, a challenge, a dare. "You could have anything you want, Amanda," he said, swirling the wine in his glass. "If you're willing to reach for it." I wasn't sure if he was talking about my career or something more. And when he reached across the table to brush a strand of hair from my face, I knew I was in over my head. I should have walked away, but I didn't. That evening felt ordinary at first. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavier at night. Mark had gone out for a business meeting, and it was just me and Anna, my stepsister. Anna was 2 years older than me, with a sharp sense of humor and an elegance that made her stand out in any room. We weren't close growing up. Our lives always seemed to run parallel rather than intersect. But that night, something shifted. "I brought wine," she said, stepping into the living room. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun, and she wore one of those oversized sweaters that made her look effortlessly beautiful. I nodded, trying to focus on the movie playing on the screen. Sure, why not? She poured us each a glass and sat down on the couch beside me, closer than usual. The movie was one of those indie dramas, all soft lighting and slow dialogue. I wasn't paying much attention, though. My mind kept drifting to the way Anna's knee brushed against mine when she shifted, or how her laughter sounded softer tonight, almost shy. Halfway through the movie, she turned to me. "You're quiet tonight. Something on your mind?" "No, just tired, I guess." I took a sip of wine, avoiding her gaze. "Long day at work." Anna smiled, a little knowingly. "Mark keeping you busy?" I laughed awkwardly. "You could say that." She studied me for a moment, her expression unreadable. "You know, he talks about you all the time. Says you're brilliant. Too good for that job." "Really?" I glanced at her, unsure if she was teasing me. "Yeah," she said, leaning back into the couch. "He's right, though. You are." Her words caught me off guard. Anna wasn't the type to hand out compliments, especially not to me. I felt a strange warmth in my chest, a mix of gratitude, and something else I couldn't quite name. As the movie played on, the room seemed to shrink around us. The spaces between us felt smaller, the air heavier. I told myself it was the wine, but deep down I knew that wasn't it. When the credits started rolling, Anna reached for the remote and turned off the TV. The sudden quiet was deafening. She set her glass down on the coffee table, then turned to me. "Can I tell you something?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," I said, my pulse quickening. "I've been thinking about us," she began, her eyes searching mine. "About how things have changed between us." "Changed?" I echoed, not sure where this was going. Anna hesitated, then reached out, her hand brushing against mine. The touch was light, almost tentative, but it sent a jolt through me. I didn't pull away. "I've never felt this way about anyone else," she admitted, her cheeks flushing. "It's confusing, and maybe it's wrong, but I can't ignore it anymore." Her words hung in the air, heavy and electrifying. My heart was racing, my mind a blur. I wanted to say something, to break the tension, but no words came. Anna leaned in, closing the distance between us. Her movements were slow, deliberate, giving me every opportunity to stop her. But I didn't. When her lips brushed against mine, it felt like everything around us disappeared. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant, but it deepened quickly, fueled by something we'd both been holding back. My hands found their way to her waist, pulling her closer. When we finally broke apart, her forehead rested against mine. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have." "Don't apologize," I interrupted, my voice shaking. I wanted this too." The words felt surreal as they left my mouth, but they were true. Whatever this was, it was undeniable. We sat there in silence for a while, our breaths mingling in the quiet. Eventually, Anna pulled away, her expression a mix of relief and uncertainty. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "I don't know," I admitted, "but we'll figure it out." She nodded, her fingers still intertwined with mine. For the first time that night, I felt a sense of calm, as if this was exactly where I was meant to be. The next few days were a strange dance of avoidance and tension. During the day, we acted as though nothing had happened, speaking in polite tones and carefully avoiding each other for too long. But at night, when the house grew quiet, the air between us felt heavy, charged with unspoken words and unresolved feelings. I tried to focus on anything else, work, books, even cleaning, but every time I saw Anna, my heart would race. Her presence was impossible to ignore, and her gaze, even when fleeting, felt like it saw straight through me. I knew she felt it too. We were caught in a web of something we couldn't name, yet couldn't escape. One evening, as I sat curled up on the couch pretending to read, Anna walked into the room. She moved with her usual grace, but there was a deliberate slowness to her steps, as though she were carefully choosing her next move. She sat down beside me, closer than usual, and for a moment, Neither of us said anything. I could feel her looking at me, and though I kept my eyes on the book, I couldn't focus on a single word. Finally, she broke the silence. "Julia," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight I couldn't ignore. "We need to talk." My heart skipped a beat. I knew this was coming, but I wasn't ready. "About what?" "You know what," she replied, her voice firm but not unkind. "About us." I felt my stomach twist. I didn't dare look at her, but then I felt her hand gently touch mine, forcing me to meet her gaze. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of vulnerability and determination, and I knew I couldn't avoid this any longer. "Anna," I began, but she shook her head, cutting me off. "No, listen," she said, her tone growing more insistent. "I can't keep pretending nothing happened. I know you feel it too. I need to know. What do you feel about me?" Her question hit me like a wave, leaving me speechless. My mind raced, searching for the right words, but they wouldn't come. She leaned in slightly, her grip on my hand tightening. "Please, Julia. I need to hear it from you. I can't do this alone anymore." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I don't know," I stammered, the truth spilling out before I could stop it. "I've never felt like this before. About anyone. It's confusing and it scares me." Anna's expression softened, her thumb gently tracing circles on the back of my hand. "It scares me too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't ignore it, and I don't think you can either." I looked down at our hands, intertwined now, and felt a strange sense of calm despite the chaos in my mind. "I don't know what this means," I said, my voice shaky but honest. "But I know I don't want to lose you." "You won't," she said, her voice steady now. "Whatever this is, we'll figure it out. Together." For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again. It wasn't a solution, but it was a start. And in that moment, it was enough. That evening, the air in Anna's room felt different. The soft glow of her bedside lamp bathed the space in warm light, and a playlist of slow, nostalgic songs played in the background. She had invited me in, and I told myself it was just to talk, just to spend time like we used to. But deep down, I knew better. We sat cross-legged on her bed, a bottle of wine between us, laughing about old family vacations and the silly things we used to fight about as kids. It felt normal, safe, like we were slipping back into a version of ourselves untouched by everything that had happened recently. But then there were the moments in between. Her gaze would linger just a little too long, her laughter fading into something softer, something more vulnerable. She wasn't hiding how she felt anymore, and I could feel the weight of her unspoken words pressing down on me. She reached over, brushing a stray piece of hair from my face. It was such a simple gesture, but it sent a shiver down my spine. "Julia," she said, her voice low, almost hesitant. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," I replied, though my throat felt tight. "Do you ever think about us?" Her question caught me off guard, even though I'd been expecting it. I tried to find the right words, but nothing came. Instead, I nodded slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. "I think about it all the time," she admitted, her cheeks flushing. "I can't stop." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the vulnerability in her eyes. She wasn't just confessing something, she was putting herself completely in my hands. "I'm scared," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "Me too," she said, leaning closer. "But I don't want to ignore this anymore." "Do you?" I couldn't answer, not with words. Instead, I closed the distance between us. Her lips met mine softly at first, like she was afraid I might pull away. But when I didn't, the kiss deepened, and suddenly all the tension, all the unspoken feelings between us, spilled over. Her hand slid to my waist, pulling me closer, and I felt my own hands moving without thought, tangling in her hair. It was intoxicating, overwhelming, and for a moment, I forgot about everything else. There was no fear, no hesitation, only her. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were breathless. She looked at me with a mix of awe and disbelief, like she couldn't quite believe what had just happened. Are you okay? She asked softly, her fingers brushing against mine. I nodded, though my heart was racing.
Yeah.
Are you? She smiled a little shyly. I've never been better. We stayed like that for a while, just holding each other, neither of us saying anything. But the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt right, like we didn't need words to understand what was happening between us. And then, slowly, she leaned in again, her hands sliding to the back of my neck. This time, there was no hesitation, no pause. The kiss deepened quickly, and before I knew it, we were lying back against the bed, her body pressing against mine. Every touch, every kiss felt like it carried 1,000 unspoken emotions. It was like we were trying to make up for all the time we'd spent holding back, for all the moments we'd ignored what was growing between us. And then it happened. We crossed the line we never thought we would, and in that moment, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Afterward, we lay tangled together, the room quiet except for the sound of our breathing. Her head rested on my chest, and I ran my fingers through her hair, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. This changes everything, doesn't it? I said softly, more to myself than to her. It does, she replied, her voice steady. But I don't regret it. Do you? I didn't answer right away. There was still so much I didn't know, so many questions I didn't have answers to. But as I looked down at her, at the way she smiled softly, her eyes heavy with contentment, I knew one thing for certain. No, I said finally. I don't regret it. She smiled, and in that moment, everything else faded away. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The morning light streamed through the curtains, and for a moment, everything felt peaceful. But as I opened my eyes and saw Anna still lying next to me, the weight of what we'd done hit me like a tidal wave. My chest tightened with guilt. What had we done? I didn't say anything as I got out of bed and quietly dressed. Anna stirred but didn't speak, her eyes following me as I moved around the room. The silence was deafening, filled with all the things we didn't know how to say. When I finally left her room, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. The house felt colder, emptier, as though it knew the line we had crossed. The days that followed were awkward at best and unbearable at worst. We barely spoke, each of us consumed by our own guilt and confusion. I couldn't look her in the eye without feeling the crushing weight of what we'd done. I thought she felt the same, but there was something in her silence that unsettled me. I started noticing little things, her nervous glances, the way she avoided being alone with me. It wasn't just guilt. It was something else. Then one evening, I overheard her on the phone. I don't know what to do, she said, her voice trembling. I can't keep this a secret forever. They deserve to know. I froze in the hallway, my heart pounding.
She was talking about us. About me.
The thought of her telling anyone, our parents, her friends, made my stomach churn. What would they think of me? What would they do? I couldn't let that happen. My mind raced as I tried to think of a way to protect myself. That's when the idea came to me. I didn't want to do it, but I felt like I had no choice. I started gathering everything I could, messages she had sent me, little notes she had written, anything that could prove that she had initiated this. I hated myself for doing it, but I convinced myself it was the only way to protect my future. One evening, as she sat in the living room scrolling through her phone, I confronted her. Anna, we need to talk, I said, my voice firm. She looked up at me, startled. About what? You know what, I replied, sitting across from her. I overheard your phone call. You're planning to tell someone, aren't you? Her expression shifted, guilt flashing across her face. I don't know. I just think we can't keep this a secret forever. You can't, I corrected her. But I can. She frowned, her confusion quickly turning to anger. What's that supposed to mean? It means, I said, pulling out my phone, I've been keeping track of everything. Messages, notes, even that night. If you try to ruin my life, I'll make sure everyone knows it was your idea. Her face went pale. You're serious? Dead serious, I said, my voice cold. I'm not proud of what we did, Anna, but I won't let you drag me down with you. For a moment, she just stared at me, her eyes wide with shock and betrayal. Then, without a word, she stood up and left the room. I sat there, my hands shaking. I didn't want to hurt her, but I couldn't let her destroy everything I'd worked for. The tension in the house became unbearable after that. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was strained and full of unspoken resentment. I knew I had crossed a line, but I told myself it was necessary. Late one night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I wondered if things would ever go back to normal. I doubted it. We had destroyed something between us, something that could never be repaired. And yet, part of me couldn't shake the memory of her touch, her smile, the way she had looked at me that night. No matter how much I tried to convince myself that I didn't care, I knew I would never forget her. But now, I had to focus on surviving. And in this game, survival meant staying one step ahead, even if it meant losing her forever. Dinner that evening felt like sitting on the edge of a cliff, knowing the ground was about to crumble beneath us. I barely touched my food, my heart pounding as I rehearsed the words in my head. Across the table, Anna sat quietly, her expression calm, but her eyes watchful. She could sense something was coming, but she didn't know what. Not yet. I set down my fork and took a deep breath. "There's something I need to say," I began, my voice trembling just enough to make everyone at the table look up. Our parents exchanged glances, confused. Anna's grip on her glass tightened, her knuckles whitening. "It's about Anna and me," I continued, forcing the words out. "Something happened. Something that shouldn't have." Anna's face drained of color. "Julia, don't," she said, her voice sharp, but it only fueled my resolve. "It was a mistake," I said, my gaze fixed firmly on the table, avoiding hers. "We crossed a line we never should have, but I want to be honest about it. To fix it." The room plunged into silence, the kind that feels like it might crush you. Our parents sat frozen, their expressions a mixture of shock and disbelief. Anna, however, wasn't frozen. She exploded. "You're blaming me?" she yelled, standing so quickly her chair nearly toppled over. "You're trying to make it sound like this was all me?" "I'm not blaming anyone," I said, my voice shaking but steady enough to sound convincing. I needed to tell them the truth." Her face twisted with anger and betrayal. "Truth? You're twisting it to make yourself look innocent." She looked at our parents, her voice desperate. "She's lying. She's making it sound like I. "Enough," her mother shouted, cutting her off. The tone of authority silenced the room instantly. "Both of you stop." For a moment, no one spoke. Anna's breathing was heavy, and tears brimmed in her eyes. Her mother's face was unreadable, but her voice was calm when she spoke again. "Anna," she said, her tone firm but not unkind, "I think it's best if you take some time away. Stay with your aunt for a while. Let everyone process this." Anna protested, but her mother's decision was final. The conversation was over. Anna's eyes darted to me, filled with rage and hurt. "You did this," she whispered, her voice trembling. Then she stormed out of the room. I stayed seated, staring at my untouched plate, my chest heavy with guilt and relief. I had done what I thought I needed to do, but it didn't feel like victory. Later that night, I sat alone in my room, staring out the window at the darkened street below. I couldn't stop replaying the scene in my head. Anna's reaction, her words. I knew I had destroyed something between us, something that could never be repaired. And yet, I also knew I couldn't live with the constant fear of what she might do, of what might happen if the truth came out on her terms. In the end, I told myself I did what I had to do. But did I? That's for you to decide. Was I right to take control, or should I have handled it differently? Let me know in the comments. This is the end of the story, or maybe it's just the beginning. That's up to you.